Today's a pretty important day in our process of designing a superhero comic book cover because we're going to be doing step-by-step drawing together for the human body proportions, and you're going to want accurate body proportions in your drawing. So today we're going to end up with something a little like this, where we'll just do a schematic of how to place the different features together. For this drawing you need like a 9 by 12-ish piece of paper and a pencil and an eraser. And the first thing I want you to consider, even though this isn't your final draft, is when you're placing the figure, you want them to fit, but you also want room for a title. And some comic books, like the Wonder Woman one over there, have the title at the top, and some have the title at the bottom, some have the title up the side. But if you were going to be placing it at the top, leave yourself 4 fingers of space and make a mark. And if you're going to be doing it at the bottom, leave yourself 4 fingers of space down at the bottom to make your mark. Whichever one you choose, use 2 fingers on the other side. So I did 4 fingers at the top, I'm going to do 2 fingers at the bottom. You could do a reversal of that. And I apologize for the camera autofocusing there. So this is going to be the height of the hero on the paper. Come on, camera, you can do it. I'm going to be pressing really lightly for all of these lines that I'm going to be making. I'm going to connect those lines with a vertical, and then I'm going to subdivide the space in half. So I want equal spacing up from the top down and then to the bottom. So that's my halfway point. Then I'm going to do quarters. And just a reminder, when you're following these drawings, you can pause, you can speed up, slow down, just so you can keep up with the drawing. And my battery's running. I'm going to push pause and plug it in. And we're back. So I've got it divided in half, in quarters, and then we're going to do eighths. And this is a good method for getting 8 even sections down your paper. For reference sake, I'm going to just lightly pull each of these out sideways, and then I'm going to label them 1 through 8. And that way when I refer to which box we're in, I'll be able to refer to it by number. The first box we're going to call the first head. I just noticed my mask is on. We're going to call that the first head. And we're using heads as measurements, which is a really common way comic book artists will refer to human body proportion. So that first box is 1 head, and then an average comic book character is going to be 8 heads tall. Humans generally fall between about 7 and 8. There's a little bit of variation, so we'll be able to kind of talk about fudging that as we go. But the height of the first head and then the height of the second head puts you right at the heart. And so this box at the bottom, or the line at the bottom of the second box, is where the heart will be. So I will lightly make sort of a shape for the chest. And I'm drawing a generic figure. Androgynous means kind of not super masculine, not super feminine, but kind of in between. I'm going to try and intentionally do a semi-androgynous character, not like a real beefy masculine one or a curvy feminine one. I'll have just a little bit of neck showing. You don't want that super long neck, and you want a little bit of shoulder coming down here, so the neck doesn't look so big and it will slope down. So the chest, when we place the width of the shoulders, we would take the width of the head as if this was a 3-headed figure. So I'm just lightly mapping that out. That's going to be the width of the shoulders, is that third head width there. And we're sloping down a bit for the shoulders. We'll come back to the arms later. The bottom of the third box is where the belly button or the belt line would be. So just below that line I'm going to make a scoop for a belt. And then the thing you want to check for here is that you're going to be wider at the top of your rib cage and a little narrower as you approach your waist. That narrowness can be a little more extreme if you've got a real thin waist or a really beefy upper body, but typically it just tapers in a little bit. What you want to check here is that this width is wider than the width of the head, because if you feel your own head and then you feel your own waist, you're going to find that your waist is a wider shape. Even the skinniest people have wider waists than their head, and so you know your drawing's wrong if your waist is skinnier than your head. You want that to be out there, but you don't want it to be so wide as to be wider than your shoulders. The fourth box is going to be hips, and when we draw hips, the best way to do it, I find, we're slightly flaring out a bit, is to draw superhero underwear, which you see Wonder Woman wearing over there. I'm going to find that middle point, and then I'm going to create spaces for the legs. This is sort of, we're kind of drawing like briefs. Your hero doesn't have to end up with this as part of their costume, but if you do this, the transition from hips to legs is going to work out a lot better than if you just try to turn the torso into a leg without having this sort of pelvis area planned out. That's the entire fourth box. The fifth box we're going to skip, and we're going to get into the sixth box where we're going to mark where the knees will go. Now, if you're standing in a wide power stance, those knees will be farther apart. If you're standing legs together, those knees will be pretty close together. But you can kind of figure that out. What are those legs going to be doing? And then we're going to connect the hips to the legs, considering the space between the legs. We don't want it to be a huge gap, because if there's a really big gap right there, it's going to look like your person's wearing a diaper. And then the thickness of the thigh should be at least as wide or similarly wide as the head typically. If you reach down and feel your own thigh width and then compare it with your head, you should find it's fairly similar. Some people have wider thighs yet, but it's rare to have a significantly thinner thigh, and if you make it much thinner than the head, then it's not going to look realistic. So we're getting down to where the knees go. We're going to jump right down to the bottom of the seventh for the ankle, and we're going to figure out how to connect that. There's a couple of bumps. There's a bump around the knee, and then there's going to be a calf muscle here that gets narrow again at the ankle. And depending on the angle of the leg, you're going to be able to change and create that. Now, a lot of the generic measurements I'm creating for you, you can refine and get much more realistic by doing Google image searches for how to draw comic book characters. You're going to get a whole bunch of the sketches that will still use the human body proportions, but you'll be able to find the type of character that you're trying to draw rather than this generic androgynous one. And you'll also be able to find better action poses rather than just the standing, hanging out type of character. Okay, two things to think about for the feet. One is, and we're just going to make sure we're in the eighth box. We don't have to get to the bottom of the eighth box. You can get there, but as long as you're in the eighth box, your proportions will be good. For the feet, you can draw a sideways profile foot, but if you do both of them that way, it's going to be unnatural. If you've ever tried to stand that way with both of your feet facing out, it's not a natural stance. So if one of them's facing a little bit out, you're going to want your other one to sort of be coming forward. In drawing a forward foot, you want to think of the toe box and then the heel box, or heel section. And there are other ways to kind of angle the feet, but you want the feet to look as good as you can. Secondly, if you take off your shoe and hold it up next to your head, you'll find that your shoe is about as long as your head. And so if you're drawing feet and you want to compare the size, you want to take that size and compare it to the size of a head and make sure it's about the same. Otherwise, if you have like really dinky feet or really giant feet, it's not going to feel right. You want them to balance with the head proportion. You can make that knee bump a little bit stronger. And I'm feeling pretty good about those legs. Most people, the first time they do this, they look at their drawing and they're like, those legs are way too long. This is like ridiculously huge. There's a couple reasons for that. The first reason is that when we talk to people, we look here at their face and we don't look here down here. So even though this is a big area proportionally, in our brains it's not as significant, and so we kind of like conceptually shrink it down. And a lot of times when people are first learning to draw and they're drawing people, they make the legs way too short because they're not as interesting as the rest, and so they don't want to spend as much proportional time on it. But secondly, if your legs look way too long, it's probably because you drew everything too skinny, which is another beginner mistake, like having the waist too skinny and then the legs too thin. And if you widen things out a little bit more, it's going to feel a little more natural. Difference between the more masculine and more feminine characters is typically the proportion of the body where you come in for the waist and then flare out at the hip. There's usually a bigger transition here on a more feminine form, and it's usually a little bit like the hips just stay more narrow on a masculine form. And again, I would encourage you to find a body type that you like in a Google image search when you're doing your final hero. You don't have to do it right now. You can just kind of do the androgynous one. We're going to go ahead and do the arms next. We've got a shoulder, and if you take your elbow and elbow yourself in the side, you'll find that it hits you right in that hip bone. And so I'm going to plan the elbow there. Bicep connects to the elbow. If you drop your hand down next to it, if you stood up and did this, you'd find that your hand doesn't get to your knee, but it can reach into a pocket pretty well, and you're going to find that the fingertips, fall somewhere down mid-thigh. So I make an oval for the hand, and then there's a sort of a bump that happens at the forearm that's thicker at the elbow, and then it gets thinner at the wrist. So we want to plan for that as we draw like a thicker forearm, skinnier wrist. Then I might just put like the thumb in front on this hand. I'm not too worried about the little details, but just enough to kind of make it feel kind of good, kind of right. And then for the other arm, instead of having it just hang out straight down, I want to talk about possible arm positions. If we're talking about the side plane, we can do like the make a fist, put the fist on the hip, do the power fist above the head. Either way, we can use that elbow plan where if the elbow is going to hit the hip and this is the pivot point, like jumping jack pivot point, we can actually use that distance and make an arc, and anywhere on that arc you can place an elbow. So for instance, if you want fist on the hip, you just think about getting that elbow out to the arc and down to where the hand or the fist might be, and that should give you a proportion that feels fairly natural. Or if you want to do like making a muscle, you're going to bring the shoulder up a little bit if you do that, and then have the bicep get out to that point, and then curl the hand in thereabouts, something like that. If you're going fist over the head, you just gotta, the elbows or the shoulder's going to come up yet again. That when you do that with your own body, you find that it lines up with near the top of your head, which is consistent with that arc we just made. And then you've got your fist above the head type thing. So those are some different options. Those are the options in the side plane. It's a lot harder to work in the front plane because we're dealing with something called foreshortening, where you see the hand or the fist and you see the back of the body, but maybe you don't see the whole arm or you don't see the length of the arm. and that's a little tricky. And sometimes you've got like partial foreshortening where you see like the side of the arm but not the front of the arm. Those are all things you can do. Like if I were to make the fist like sticking out right there, punching forward, I might just see like the shoulder and then like part of a bump, but I can't see the full length of the arm. And then distance-wise, if you've got a feature forward, it's going to increase in size. If you've got a feature behind, it's going to decrease in size. Which is why if you can see Wonder Woman's like hand that's sort of behind holding the lasso there, it looks a little smaller because it's back farther from her body. So those are just some things to think about. Now, same basic principle with the leg. Like if you're doing like a kneeling character, like the knee might be here and like their leg is coming back, you know, or if they're jumping or kicking or something like that. Those are all things that you can sort of translate the idea of the proportion, but just to figure out how to shift it in space. We did not too long ago facial proportions. When we do that, the most important thing to start with is the halfway down the head is the eye line. You don't want to put the eyes way up on the forehead. You want to make sure that they're halfway down. We space the eyes with an eye width in between. Nose is halfway down from the eyes and the chin. And the mouth's just a little closer to the nose than the mouth. And drawing at this scale, it's harder to get all your details in. And you can, again, look up different facial design ideas to make your hero look good. And then we are going to plan a hairstyle again. Hair is going to come down a little bit in the forehead, and whatever kind of hair you want your hero to have, you can kind of plan that out. They're different hairstyle, and some are very stylized, like the manga style. You might have like some interesting spiky stuff going on. I don't know. For this drawing, it's not really important, but it's a good idea to kind of pick the hairstyle that you're going to aim for your final, just to kind of get a little practice run in. Same thing with costuming. You can add costuming to this character, like if you want to put a cape on it. If you've seen The Incredibles, you know that that's a hazardous piece of superhero equipment. But maybe you want that, or maybe you want to put a big belt buckle or some sort of logo symbol, or big gloves or big boots. You know, those are all things you can add to your hero right now on this one if you want to. But primarily we're concerned with figuring out how to space all of the features. So if you've gone through this video and done that, you've met the lesson objectives, and all I would need from you is to take a photo of this and drop it into Brightspace. If you've done it, you'll get the full credit points if you followed along with me. If you need to go back and watch the video again, please do. Otherwise, we're going to continue this project with a video each day, but we're going to start talking about how to place title font, placing the company logo in the corner, figuring out how to handle the background so it feels like there's a story happening and not just a cool looking figure standing in the middle of nothing. We really want to get some story elements in, some different text that's going to sort of give you a sneak peek into what you would find if you were to actually read the story. If you have questions, shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to seeing your drawings.